morning, good afternoon, good evening. You are listening to Headspace Diaries, where we explore psychology and related sciences from a student's point of view. I'm your host, Malavika, and today we will be looking at the Little Albert experiment. Firstly, I think some apologies are due. I haven't done an episode in a long time because I was having my university exams. And if you're a university student, you know how crazy it can get. Okay, so let's come back to our episode. The Little Albert experiment was conducted by John B. Watson and Rosalie Rayner. So as always, let's take a look at who they were, what the experiment was, what its findings were, and what its implications were. And just a heads up, the circumstances surrounding this experiment is highly scandalous. So listen till the end to find out why. Now, give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed and my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take any one at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant chief, and yes, even beggarman and thief. Regardless of his talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and the race of his ancestors. Anyone who is married to the field of psychology knows that these were the famous words spoken by John Watson. Do you think that would have been possible though? I mean, Mr. Watson seemed sure of it. Let me know down in the comment section if you think that this would have been at least plausible. Now, John Watson, or Mr. John Watson, was an American psychologist born in 1878 who founded behaviorism. That is the idea that psychology should focus on observable actions rather than internal mental states. So in the previous episodes, we talked about classical conditioning, and I think we went a little into the different schools of thoughts that we have. So this is one of those schools of thoughts. And so basically, he believed that behavior is learned through interactions with the environment and can be shaped or controlled using conditioning techniques. And in 1913, Watson published The Psychology as the Behaviorist Views It, which is it's often called as the Behaviorist Manifesto, which rejected the then dominant method of introspection, that is, examining one's own mental and emotional processes. So up till now, what was happening is that we used to have a school of thought that focused on internal mental actions, and it was called the structuralism, and it was focused on finding out the structure of the mind. It was focused on the internal mind, and now behaviorism comes along and rejects it. So he was deeply inspired by the work of Ivan Pavlov, and he pioneered the research in classical conditioning as well. Now, this brings us to his partner, Rosalie Rayner. She was born on September 25, 1898 in Baltimore to a well-established Maryland family. Her father and grandfather were Baltimore businessmen, and her uncle was even a senator who managed public inquiries into the sinking of the Titanic. That is epic. So, upon graduating from the Vassar College in 1919, she enrolled at Johns Hopkins for graduate studies. There, she became assistant to John B. Watson, and they embarked on the now infamous Little Albert experiments to prove that the classical conditioning can also be applied to humans. Now, the other result of this collaboration was an affair between Watson and Rayner that precipitated Watson's bitter and very public divorce from his wife, Mary X. Now you know why I said that the circumstances surrounding this experiment were scandalous, to say the least. Now, in her profession, however, Rosalie was an exceptional woman who co-authored many articles such as Studies in Infant Psychology, and she even wrote the article, I Am the Mother of Behaviorist Sons. They had 2 children together, and they remained married until she died in 1935. So let's try to understand the Little Albert experiment a little. It was conducted at the Johns Hopkins University between 1919 and 1920, and they worked with a healthy, fearless 9-month-old boy that they nicknamed Little Albert. So he was actually the son of a wet nurse at the Harriet Lane Home for Invalid Children. So when he was 9 months old, the researchers tested his reaction to various stimuli like a white rat, a rabbit, a dog, a monkey, masks with and without hair, cotton wool, even burning newspapers. And he showed no fear of it because he had not yet learned fear. Instead, he typically tried to reach out and manipulate the objects, curious rather than afraid. The only stimulus that startled him was when they struck a steel bar behind his head. He started crying. But Albert rarely cried. 2 months later, when Albert was just over 11 months old, Watson and Rayner began the conditioning procedure. Their aim was to see if they could make him fear a white rat by pairing it with the loud noise that had previously startled him. So, in the first session, 2 trials were held. They placed a rat in front of him, and as soon as he touched the rat, they struck the steel bar behind his head and he jumped violently. This was when he was 11 months old. So it's important to note that in the first session, he did not cry. In between the sessions, he was given wooden blocks to play with so that we could control the experiment to be in such a way that his fear was specific to the rat and not generalized anxiety. A week later, they held the second session where he was hesitant to touch the rat. He tried to avoid it by crawling away quickly and eventually even began to cry. After his fear had been established, they checked to see if it would extend to other animals like rabbits and dogs, and other stimuli such as masks and coats. The result was that he showed conflicting responses. He tried to reach out, but he also withdrew. So he showed anxiety towards objects that seemed similar to the furry rat. And they also tested him in a new environment where his reactions were weaker and less intense but still present. So here what is seen is a phenomena called as generalization. It's when the similar stimuli to the conditioned stimulus evokes similar responses or the conditioned response. And it's something that we will discuss later on in this episode. So now, after 1 month, they retested his fear responses and they were weaker and partially extinct. So this is another phenomenon which is called extinction. Again, we will discuss this in a short while. And avoidance clearly remained. This study also demonstrated how children cope with distress by thumb sucking and other mechanisms. The persistence of fear was there, though it was less intense. Now, new behaviors such as shuddering and covering his face emerged. In this experiment, a baby who had previously shown no fear of a white rat was conditioned to become afraid of it. So let's go to the concepts that were illustrated by this experiment, which is extinction and generalization, like I said. Extinction occurs when a conditioned association gradually weakens and eventually disappears if it's not reinforced. Although the conditioned fear response can be strong at first, repeated exposure to the conditioned stimulus without the unconditioned stimulus will cause the reaction to fade. You learn that the unconditioned stimulus was a one-time event and there's nothing to be afraid of. Now, generalization, like I said, it happens when a conditioned response transfers to stimuli that are similar to the original one. For Albert, the fear extended beyond the rat to other furry objects such as rabbit, dog, fur, coat, cotton wool, and even a Santa Claus mask. Why? Because they seem similar to the rat in one or more aspects. Now, even after a month, Albert still avoided the rat and the rabbit, though his reactions were less intense. This showed that extinction was underway but incomplete. Now, little Albert was allegedly Douglas Merritt, the son of a wet nurse named Arvilla Merritt, who lived and worked at the campus hospital at the time of the experiment. At least this is what psychologists Hall P. Beck and Sharman Levinson claims. And they also claim that Arvilla Merritt received $1 for her baby's participation. It is said that Watson never deconditioned the child and was dismissed from the university around the same time for having an affair with Rayner. Another unscrupulous part of this study was that Douglas was not a healthy, normal infant, as they claimed in the study, but one who was very ill and exhibited symptoms of hydrocephalus since birth. So, with this condition, there is an accumulation of cerebrospinal fluid in the brain, and this may have caused him trouble seeing at the time of the experiment. And his actions, even during the experiment, was aligned with neurological impairment. However, this alleged identity that little Albert is actually Douglas Merritt, has been contested by psychologists and researchers Russ Powell and his team, who offered an alternative identity based on available data. That is of Albert Barger, or William Barger as he was called by his family. Now, Powell revealed that Douglas Merritt was completely blind, which is at odds with the experiment's films. Through the use of a professional genealogist, the researchers learned that Barger had died in 2007 at age 87 and had an antipathy to dogs and an aversion to animals his entire life. So the question we ask is, was it worth it? Can we ignore the unethical aspects of this experiment and look away solely because of the huge impact it brought to the field of psychology? Can a life of zoophobia be overlooked for the gains this study had on the understanding of the fear conditioning in humans? Or was exploiting the brief life of Douglas Merritt a necessary evil? With that thought, we are coming to the end of our episode on the Little Albert experiment. So, how did you find this episode? Your reviews matter. And if you like this episode, please comment down below what other experiments you would like to hear about and share it with a loved one. And thank you for listening to Headspace Diaries. This is your host, Malavika, signing off.